1500s, Protestant Lelio Socini set about to reinterpret the prologue in John 1. Socini argued that since the Gospels and the book of Acts use the word beginning to describe the start of the ministry of Jesus, John 1:1 must mean the same thing. As far as I know, this interpretation of the prologue of John was not known before the 16th century and later influenced Lelio's nephew Fausto Socini, or Socinus, the founder of the non-Trinitarian movement that came to be known as Socinianism, also known as the Polish Brethren. These early non-Trinitarians were hoping to counter the millennia-old Trinitarian interpretation of John 1:1 as saying that in the beginning was the eternal God the Son, and he was with God. But the novel Socinian objection that John 1:1 instead should be read as in the beginning of the ministry of Jesus comes across as an overreaction from those non-Trinitarians of the time and predicated on their false notion that somehow the Word of God is a separate and distinct person from God. The fact is that for the Old Testament writers, the Word of God was either the self-expression of God or a personified quality of God. And we all know that a personification is not an actual person. So when John 1:1 says that the Word was with God, it does not mean that God was with another person. In the Old Testament, other qualities of God are said to be with him. For example, the famous passage in Proverbs chapter 8 and 9 pictures the wisdom of God as a lady who is said to be with the Lord. Elsewhere, in places like Isaiah 40 and 62, God's reward, salvation, and power are said to be with him. The same is true for the Torah, the law of God, in Isaiah chapter 2, 51, and Micah 4. Also to be considered is the Greek phrase translated in the beginning of John 1:1. Is the same as the one used for the Greek version of Genesis 1:1. This same phrase is also used verbatim for Lady Wisdom in Proverbs 8, where it is seen as synonymous with the Word of God. So just because John sometimes uses the word by itself, beginning, to denote the start of the ministry of Jesus, it is not the same phrase used in John 1:1. As a matter of fact, the phrase in the beginning is only used here in John 1:1. That the prologue is a reference to Genesis is also attested by Old Testament verses like Psalm 33:6. By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, their starry host by the breath of his mouth. So just like the word of God is synonymous with the breath of his mouth, the same is true for the Spirit of God in Genesis 1 verses 2 and 3. The New Testament writers understood this when they said in Hebrews 11 that it was by the word of the Lord that the earth was made. Furthermore, in Genesis 1 verse 3, the Greek phrase translated "let there be" is the same Greek word translated as "came into being" in John 1 verse 10, in connection with the creation of the world, or what John calls the cosmos. And the phrase "the light that shines in the darkness" in John 1 verse 5 echoes Genesis 1 verse 4, where God is said to separate the light from the darkness. These examples explain why John uses what's known as the divine passive when he says that all things were created, that is, by God. And we know the all things can only fit the Genesis creation by all that has been proven. As a matter of fact, the phrase all things is repeated by other New Testament writers in connection with the creation of the heavens and the earth. Ephesians 3, Romans 11, Hebrews 3, and Revelation 5. The Catholic scholar Raymond Brown summed it up well when he observed that if John 1:1 refers to the beginning of the ministry of Jesus, then the clearer reference to Jesus coming in John 1 verse 9 and 10 seems tautological, that is, a needless repetition by the writer. John has inserted a reference to John the Baptist after verse 5, and one can scarcely imagine that the writer would introduce John the Baptist after describing the ministry of Jesus and its effect. Clearly, the writer thought that the references to the coming of Jesus began in verse 10, He put the coming of John the Baptist in verses 6 to 8 before the coming of Jesus, and used verse 9 to connect John the Baptist to the moment of that coming. So it makes little sense for John to introduce the ministry of Jesus before introducing the ministry of John, especially when you consider that none of the other gospel writers do this. But more importantly, this breaks the prophecy of the Baptist as the one who would prepare the way. Or simply put, the Apostle John did not put the proverbial cart before the horse.